You're tuning in to the Black Hollywood Live Network, featuring news, interviews, and commentary on all things Black Hollywood. Hollywood redefined. From Los Angeles, California, streaming live thanks to Akamai Technologies. This is Black Hollywood Live. Justice is served. Featuring the week's roundup and commentary on legal news. Black Hollywood Live. Hollywood redefined.
You're listening to Black Hollywood Live.
And now, the host for Black Hollywood Live, Justice is Served.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Justice is Served, where we bring you the latest and trending legal news on a weekly basis. My name is Sara Azari. I'm a criminal defense attorney and one of your co-hosts here on the show. And today I'm joined by my partner in crime, attorney Chelsea Galicia. Hi, Chelsea.
Hi there. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's nice to be back after a few weeks and catch up on the news with Chelsea. So today's show is actually got some very interesting legal news for our viewers of somewhat of a international variety, I would say. We're going to start with the corruption case of the Finnish police detective / drug cartel leader, and this is a case that has had the international stage in complete awe. And we're going to move over to On the Docket, where we talk about the latest and not so greatest for Bill Cosby, the Boston crime boss Whitey Bulger, and his bid for a new trial. Snoop Dogg, who has been stopped in Italy, and over $200,000 was seized from him in cash in the airport at Cambria. And finally, Tom Brady's lawsuit against the NFL and where that is headed. So we're going to start off by having Chelsea lead us into our case of the week.
Okay, great. So yes, this is a story out of Finland that has embarrassed the country because they are in the midst of the trial of their head of drug enforcement. The chief drug guy is on trial for essentially being a drug cartel in his own right. So the allegations are that he used his 30 years of experience on the job to learn about how the cartels run and operate so that he could basically start his own. We were talking about this before. Did he, become a police officer in order to do this, or was he a police officer who just turned corrupt? That's really fascinating part of this whole story that I had not yet thought about, but this is what is going down right now, and the whole world is in shock, not just because this is a high-level police officer who was caught smuggling drugs in, I think to the tune of about, in dollars, it would be about more than $10 million between 2010 and 2013. And not only that it's happened at all, but that it's happened in Finland, who, according to one of those organizations that checks on transparency perceptions of countries around the world, Finland is number 3 in terms of being viewed as a not corrupt country, right behind Denmark and Finland. I'm sorry, Denmark and
New Zealand.
New Zealand. And so for
it was like
Finland,
the 3rd least corrupt.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So he is facing 13 years in prison, which I was maybe a little surprised seemed low to me, because that is for 30 charges. They include drug smuggling, forgery, abuse of public office, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. A couple of those which he's already been convicted of. I don't know, Sarah, what was more interesting? The fact that he had like 65,000 euros stashed in his backyard, or that his defense is, I was undercover?
Right. Well, aside from the evidence that's pretty overwhelming against him, he also had a number of luxury cars. He had over 500,000, €500,000 sort of just in cash to his name. And this is not typical detective salary, Chelsea. Detectives don't make that kind of money. And it's interesting because, he was the ringleader and used the experience that you just mentioned, over 30 years of studying narcotic trafficking and then being in the task force, he's used this experience to actually avoid being detected and help his cartel avoid being detected. So I think the sentence that you mentioned, that, perhaps alluding to whether it's too light for this type of offense. The drug part of this is, you're dealing with hashish, as my understanding was what he was trafficking. And in the broad spectrum of drugs, it's not the worst. It's kind of like marijuana. So although I don't know what the law is in Finland, I assume that it probably is not viewed as harshly or treated as harshly as it would be if it was, a more serious like methamphetamine or ecstasy or something like that. But it's an interesting case because he's claiming that as a good detective, you have to fly under the radar. You have to be anonymous. You have to be undercover, and that's exactly what I did. But he's avoiding this overwhelming amount of information and evidence that is against him, that points the finger to him. Apparently, they had him on surveillance. They had him on wiretap calls where the calls were monitored and recorded.
I mean,
right?
and some of this is stuff like he helped curtail sting operations. He
Correct.
would tell his subordinates or hey, don't accept this shipment because they're watching it. So I don't know how that would be helpful to the police if he was in fact undercover. I would assume you go undercover to help obtain information that is
and
helpful.
cause an arrest, not to intercept the arrest.
So I'm wondering what information he thinks he brought to law enforcement in his operation undercover. I'm going to turn narc for a little, it just doesn't, it doesn't smell, doesn't pass the smell test.
Right.
And I think this guy's going down. And I think it's also raised questions about where else could it happen? Could that happen here? Since it happened in Finland, someplace where nobody really suspects that that kind of activity is going down.
Two things on that. First of all, the obstruction of justice that you just mentioned, where he intercepted a sting operation, where he's supposed to make sure it goes smoothly and that they catch the bad guys. He intercepted it. Well, one of the recipients failed to obey his warning or listen to his warning and said, no, I'm going to accept the package anyway. Once he gets arrested and goes into the hands of law enforcement, he decides to roll and cooperate, and he begins to speak about who's really involved in all of this. And when, I forget his name, it's Detective Arnio. Detective Arnio hears about this cooperation against him. He then goes a step further from obstruction of justice to witness intimidation and witness tampering. So he puts in a very dangerous guy. He places the guy into Fisherman, the person that rolled on him, his cell. And then he also has indirectly, through his lawyer, him intimidated that if you continue to talk, bad things are going to happen to you. So he just never even stopped. There was no stopping this guy. And I think it can happen anywhere. Corrupt police, corrupt detectives, I think, are universal. I don't think they're limited to a nice, peaceful country like Finland. They could happen to any of us in any country. But I just think that maybe I'd like to think that we have a little bit more of checks and balances in place. Do you know if in Helsinki they had any or did they place any type of measures in response to this?
Yeah, so at the time that this all went down, they did not have any, but apparently the country is really good at learning from its mistakes and quickly implemented some kind of task force whose sole purpose it was to make sure that people in power were not abusing that power and becoming corrupt. So
I think we already have that. We have pretty strong internal mechanisms in place, and the FBI and the DEA and
although
our
it's
local
interesting
law
that we have talked about in the corruption cases here that some of the things that people have done is try and defund internal affairs investigators. I can't remember who we were talking about, but something in the sheriff's office when the guy underneath Baca was
Yes,
arrested, and
Tanaka.
and part of what he was doing was trying to defund the Internal Affairs Department so
Right.
that people couldn't find
Right,
out what he was
right.
up to.
Right, but you know, we had the mechanism in place, and he was trying to bring it down. Whereas I believe here, this
didn't
guy
even
was
have
the guy, and he wasn't answerable to anyone. Anyway, all right. Well, different types of corruption on the docket. The New York Magazine cover has received extensive media coverage with a photograph of 35 of the 46 women who have accused Bill Cosby of drugging and raping or sexually assaulting them. And these women are of different colors, different ages, different walks of life, who have come forward not only in their identity, in their visual identity, in their photograph, but their names, a very explicit description of the act, when it happened, how it happened. And this article or coverage by New York Magazine spans over 79 or 80 pages. It is very, very striking, Chelsea. I think the first thing that came to my mind as a defense attorney was that, normally we shield the identity of victims of sexual assault. The system is very, very careful about not mentioning names. They're named as Jane Doe. We certainly don't put out their photographs and let the world know who they are. And here we've got these women, with makeup looking great, in this layout, coming forward. And interestingly, the article is called "I'm No Longer Afraid." But this is just a little, a little piece of the latest on Mr. Cosby. The bigger issue that has come to light is that the recent California Supreme Court decision allowing Judith Huth, who was one of the victims of Bill Cosby, to proceed with her civil lawsuit against Cosby, even though the statute of limitations would have ordinarily expired. So Chelsea and I actually had covered Judith Huth's claims several shows ago, and she was the one that was 15 at the time in the 70s. She met Cosby with a friend, and Cosby took him to the Playboy Mansion and allegedly drugged them and sexually assaulted Huth. And so Huth, of course, is represented by Gloria Allred, super aggressive, pit bull of an attorney who specializes in defending women's issues such as this, and she just wouldn't back down after the lawsuit, after Cosby's attorneys filed a petition with the California Supreme Court saying, you need to look at this case and these claims, because not only the statute has run, but you have to look at the validity of this, because 10 years ago she had brought this up and tried to extort me with this story, etc. And the Supreme Court says, we're denying your request, Mr. Cosby. We're going to let her proceed. There's some things I want to talk about in terms of the law around this for our viewers, but I want to know, Chelsea, what your take is on this green light that our Supreme Court has given the claimant.
Well,
plaintiff.
At first glance, I was like, wow, this is cool for us, because now there's going to be a deposition and he can't assert his Fifth Amendment rights because he can't get prosecuted because the statute of limitations has run.
For sure has run in the criminal cases.
So he has to answer the questions, and this would, further create cracks in his story, the way that the release of the other deposition transcript has done. But then you're like, well, if the statute of limitations has expired, what is the point in letting this happen? And it's because in California, there's an exception to the statute of limitations. It's sort of told or held off if a woman has a repressed memory that then comes to light.
If the assault occurred when you were underage and you have a repressed memory.
Right. So that is what the Gloria Allred's theory is on this, and that's why they believe that they can go forward. The defense to that is that, no, she didn't just remember this. She remembered it at least 10 years ago, because that's when she tried to get money from me. But that is all an issue for the trier of fact in the trial level.
Correct.
So that's why the Supreme Court let it go forward, and boy, am I looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I think it's huge, and it's not good for Cosby, because in the 90s is when that law changed or came about, actually, that allowed this 3-year window for victims child victims of sexual assault who have had a repressed memory to later be able to bring their claim despite the statute of limitations. But there is still a requirement on that, which is you can't just say, oh, I had a repressed memory and now I just suddenly remembered it. You have to have a certificate of merit from a licensed therapist who's going to say, I've evaluated this person. I believe that this is the first time this memory came back, and that so long as that date is within 3 years from the time that you're bringing your lawsuit, then you're okay. And with respect to Cosby's camp and their defense that this is what are you talking about? 3 years? It's 10 years ago you had memory of this because you were trying to extort money from me and making the same claim, and we shut you down back then. This is going to, if nothing else, even if at the end of the day Judith Huth does not prevail at trial against Cosby, you're going to have extensive discovery and depositions. Gloria Allred has already stated that she's looking forward to deposing him this month, and she'll even go to Massachusetts to make it convenient for him because that's where he lives. And I think this must be such a nightmare for Cosby. Of course, his silence is deafening. He hasn't responded.
Well, except he now has this new pit bull attorney who he had speak to Huffington Post Live. I'm not sure if you had a chance to catch the interview. Who very aggressively and abrasively is short with the interviewer and says exactly just the points that she wants to get in, which were that this hasn't been prosecuted, he hasn't been found guilty by a court of law. So then she speaks out of both sides of her mouth and saying, so people can say what they want, but then she says everybody should move on since he was never prosecuted and never convicted. So apparently they're saying more now, but the spokesperson they decided to use, I'm sorry, I'm sure she's a great attorney, but she was so obnoxious and willing as a person to watch. I couldn't even listen to the whole thing, that I don't think she did her client any favors. And although she kept saying...
Is she the African-American woman?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm an attorney, and as an attorney, and as a believer in the justice system, and if she's only an attorney who cares about the court of law, what is she doing on Huffington Post Live? If she's saying that the court of public opinion doesn't matter and that the only thing that matters is what's decided in court, then what is she doing on a show? And what is she doing being interviewed?
Yeah, and I have to say, dealing with this nightmare right now, if I represented Cosby, I would remain silent as his lawyer as well. It's not just keeping my client silent. This is the type of case where, in most cases, you don't want to make these types of comments so early on, especially in your client's case, where you don't know what's going to happen, because it's really hard to be able to retract what you've said earlier to the media down the road when things don't go as you had promised or anticipated that they would go. It's kind of like, remember what you said earlier,
Well, she was careful not to say anything. She would not concede anything. No logic was allowed to pass her lips.
And you mentioned a point that he hasn't been prosecuted, he hasn't been convicted. That's not the only forum in which Cosby can be found guilty. Cosby can, if this lawsuit goes forward, because now it's allowed to go forward, and it goes to trial. At the end of that trial, if he gets a guilty verdict, well, guess what? That is one way that, not a guilty verdict, I'm sorry, if they find in favor of the defendant, that's one way that he's liable for this offense.
Same with the defamation suits.
Right.
So the women who claimed that he did this, and when he came out and attacked them as liars or whatever, then they sue him for defamation. And part of a defamation claim, or the defense is that the defamatory statement was true. So then it comes, it causes the merits of whether these allegations are true to be an issue in these defamation cases. So the day in court is not come and gone the way that she presents.
It's too early. And I think she's saying too much, frankly. But the last question I have on this case, which, by the way, I hope our viewers continue with us through the weeks, because this is going to get more and more interesting as this case unfolds and hopefully goes to trial. The bigger question, and not really a legal question, is whether Cosby can be resurrected. This is, the Jello pudding man, America's dad, the favorite guy, the moralist. Does he still have a chance? Because, America loves to hear about somebody falling, but we also love a good comeback story. And so can he come back and be resurrected? What do you think?
I think it took so long for him to fall because people were so resistant to believe that he could do this. And now that so many stories of similar circumstances, and
It's
then
a
now
pattern.
the transcript has come out. There's just way too many things.
So you don't think so?
So it's just been
Right.
too far
Too
I
far
mean,
gone,
this is just
yeah.
like an avalanche. I mean, it started with a pebble, and then slowly it took like 20, 30 years for this to become the storm that it is today.
Yeah.
And also, I've heard a lot of people say that, Mr. Cosby is old, and this detriment to his legacy may in fact kill him. There may not in fact be time for his legacy, his reputation to
even
be
harmed?
resurrected.
Oh, to be resurrected, yeah. And I just think that, just the fact that he's been silent, his silence is deafening. He's not apologized. The deposition of 1,000 pages, 4 days long, that came out in the Andrea Constant case and one of his other accusers, basically, he was just so cavalier and just sort of this playboy who just doesn't see anything wrong with doing this, that it's like
But
you
it's
said,
almost
it's really
entitled.
damaging. Yeah. It's like, it's what's wrong with this? Like, what.
If they showed
And-
up, they needed to do whatever I wanted.
Right. And it just, so I think you're right. And of course, we want to know what you guys think. So please tweet us at Chelsea Galicia, at Azari Law. Let us know what you think, as we're curious. All right. Next on the docket, Boston crime boss Whitey, I can never say his last name, Whitey Bulger, bids for a new trial on appeal. And essentially, I guess the issue here is what are his chances? And I actually think, and I'm going to repeat this at the end of this, but I think he has a pretty good chance to get back into the trial court. His lawyers want him back into the trial court. He is serving 2 life sentences on 11 murders that he applauded on the East Coast. He was a famous guy. He was on the FBI's most wanted list. And finally, after decades of being on the run, he was caught in Santa Monica and brought to justice in 2011, I believe.
Yep.
And so now, on appeal, he's saying, back when we were in trial, I wanted to take the stand. I have a constitutional right, Fifth Amendment right that we all do, to either remain silent or defend myself and testify on my own behalf. And the judge essentially choked me and didn't let me speak by refusing to let me testify about an immunity deal that the prosecution had given me to commit these crimes. Well, the issue here, Chelsea, is not... it's really not a constitutional issue. It's an evidentiary issue. As an attorney, you also know that certain things come in and can be used in a trial against somebody, and certain things are precluded from coming in. And that's what the judge's job is, to see what's relevant, what's not prejudicial, and to see what evidence ultimately can be brought before the jury. This just happened to be one of the things that the judge felt is inappropriate to be brought before and that's it. But his lawyers are very cleverly making this a constitutional issue and about probably the most sacrosanct, constitutional right that we have, which is our
Fair
Fifth
trial.
Amendment.
Yeah.
Fair trial, Sixth Amendment, right to remain silent, Fifth Amendment, or, right to remain silent or speak on your own behalf. And so, what do you think? Do you agree with me that he's going to, because of the type of violation that he's alleging, being the Fifth Amendment?
Well, as the criminal expert here, I would probably defer to you, but my initial feeling was no, because the prosecutor, I understand, have said that the determination of whether there was immunity was something that happened or would have occurred before trial, like a pre-trial determination. So it's not about what happened at trial, but about what happened before trial. Was he really given the opportunity to have this be heard? But I understand that the judge found that the guy who he said he got immunity from, Jeremiah O'Sullivan, who was an assistant U.S. attorney who died in 2009, never had the kind of authority to
have such an agreement in the first place.
And then, do we give people immunity for committing 11 murders?
Right. Well, it's not even about the merit of what he's saying. It's just looking at it just from the surface. You didn't let me testify about A, and therefore I could not take the stand because I couldn't testify at all. I was precluded from. It was like, to him, it's all or nothing. And the prosecutors now are saying, yeah, right. The reason you didn't take the stand is because you didn't want to be grilled and shredded to pieces before the jury on all the crimes that you'd committed that maybe we hadn't even charged you with, but that would have been relevant for the jurors to hear. And so that's why you didn't take the stand. It's not because of the judge's ruling, but I still think it's a very clever move on his attorney's part, and that if he's going to get this reversed in order to get back into the trial court, I think that a Fifth Amendment and Sixth Amendment, both Fifth and Sixth. Your Fifth Amendment is to remain silent or speak on your own behalf to defend yourself, and your Sixth Amendment is right to fair trial and fair counsel and right to counsel. And I think both of those are very, very important constitutional rights, much more so than First Amendment or any of those.
Even though the defense attorneys couched it in terms of those issues, really we're just talking about an evidentiary issue.
Right.
So
it is
the determination about whether he had immunity, I don't think is the same thing as his right to take the stand. You know, he decided on his own to do that. It's not like he was just denied the opportunity to do that. So I think his lawyers have done a great job of couching this in terms that would make any person go, well, yeah, you got to give the guy a fair shot.
Yeah.
And good job on that. But as for whether it turns out well for him, I have a feeling it won't, although really in this case, I'm not going to bet against you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, it's hard to know what the judge is how the judge is going to view it, but I do think that he's making a very strong argument. How that's going to be ultimately interpreted, obviously, is going to be determined by the judge, who's going to have to listen to arguments on both sides. But so, what do you think? Do you think that Whitey is going to get back into a trial court and get his convictions reversed on this appeal, or do you think that this is it? He's going to continue doing the 2 life sentences and never see the light of day? Tweet us at Azari Law, at Chelsea Galicia. All right, next on the docket, poor Snoop Dogg is, he's touring Europe on his new album, which I really like, but he's not catching a break. I think last week when I wasn't here, Chelsea had covered the recent news with him in Sweden, where he was stopped as a passenger and was tested for being under the influence of drugs, I believe. And most recently, last weekend, he gets off his private jet in the Cambria airport in Italy, and over $200,000 in cash is seized from him because it is undeclared. The issue here is that most countries, including the United States, and we're very, very hard on this because I've actually defended people who violated this law, have money laundering laws in place at the border that require passengers who are coming into the country with monetary instruments of over, every country has their own threshold. Ours is over $10,000. But most countries, like in Europe, most countries are 10,000 euros, over 10,000 euros. So that's sort of the I don't want to say it's set in stone, but it's sort of the magic number for most countries. If you have monetary instruments, not just cash, money orders, any type of funds that exceed that amount, you are supposed to fill out a very detailed form talking about why you have it, where it came from, why you're traveling with it, and what are you going to do with it. And you probably are also going to be questioned on your way out of the country to see what has happened to those funds. And this is a way for countries to control money laundering across their borders. Well, what Snoop failed to do is he failed to fill out the form in Italy, and he gets stopped, and the cash is taken away from him. And of course, he has a lawyer in Italy, I believe, trying to get back the cash. And I can tell you that in order to do that, you're going to have to trace the cash and prove, where it came from. It. Snoop says, this was cash that I had on me because I was going to pay my band members. It was cash that I accumulated from the different concerts and things. And, I had to pay people with it. What do you think, Chelsea?
Well, I do not know the way the music industry works, but to run around with that much cash on you, as that's like a regular practice. I mean, he's not new. He's been in this game for a long time.
He's 43 years old. He's been doing this his whole life.
So I don't understand. I mean, really, is that how everybody gets paid these days, in cash?
I thought the same, and I also thought, I mean, what are you, the tour manager, the band man? I mean, it's not your job to pay. You've got people working for you that are traveling with you, that are touring with you. They can pay everyone, even if everyone's getting paid in cash. Like, why is this cash all in? And what do? Go to the doorman at the concert and pick up the cash like an armored truck and carry it with you?
Something is very bizarre here.
Yeah, it's unusual, but his lawyer will either be able to prove that this cash was legitimate. Otherwise, this cash is not going to be returned to Snoop. I don't think they're going to have the ability to prove, or want to prosecute him or want to spend the resources to prosecute him for some kind of money laundering. But I think that it's a question of whether he's going to get the cash back or not. And if he can't trace the funds and actually, other than his own explanation that he gave the officers at the airport, be able to prove that this cash was legitimately in his possession, he could say bye-bye to the cash, which I really don't think matters for him.
Well, but he was upset to be pulled over and drug tested.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to ever go back to Europe, right?
Probably not. So I think if I had to choose between wrongly pulled over and drug tested versus having 200,000 taken, I'll do the drug test any day.
Right.
But maybe for him, and I doubt it, that even for him, $200,000 is just whatever.
It's probably,
breakfast.
but he felt, it's also his reputation, to say, oh yeah, Snoop Dogg last week was under the influence. This week he's money laundering. So, I mean, I think he did the right thing by getting a lawyer and trying to fight this. It just doesn't matter principle. But ultimately, the bottom line or the end of the day, it's about the cash. It's not about prosecuting Snoop in Italy. So I think we can all rest assured that he's going to come back to the U.S. and probably never go back to Europe. He already thinks it's racial profiling, that this is happening to him left and right. All right, let us know what you think. Tweet us at Chelsea Galicia, at Azari Law, and share your thoughts. And last on the docket, Tom Brady, we had talked about his deflate, what was it called?
Deflategate.
Deflategate, yeah. The Deflategate operation charge that was brought against him, where he was suspended for 4 games. He appealed it, and Commissioner Goodell of the NFL, heard his own decision, which happens, by the way, in a court of law as well. And it's something that really bothers me, but I don't understand, but that's just how it goes. And he looked at his own decision and said, nope, I'm not biased. I'm standing by my decision.
I wonder if he really did it in that tone of voice and with that kind of cavalier.
No, but I mean, he basically said, no, thanks for the appeal, but it stands because I'm not biased. And so now Tom Brady has first filed a lawsuit in Minneapolis, because there's been a trend that in the district court in Minneapolis, there's been findings in favor of the players of the union. And so he said, okay, well, NFL, it exists in all 50 states. Chelsea can talk more about this. Civil procedure says that you have to have jurisdiction over the cause of action. Well, if NFL's in every state, then I'm going to choose where I'm going to file it. I'm going to file it in Minnesota. Well, then what happens is the NFL files its own lawsuit to affirm the decision of Goodell, and also to join the two claims, and says, no, the appropriate place to bring this is New York. And the district court judge in New York says, yes, we're moving this to New York. There's no reason for this to be in Minneapolis. The headquarters for NFL are in New York City. I believe
Well, Brady plays in Massachusetts.
Brady plays in Massachusetts. The union is in Washington, D.C., and there was some other ties directly to New York as well. So he said, we're moving this to New York. And so now, that there's two issues here, Chelsea. One is, in terms of Brady's claims, the commissioner was biased and should not have heard this appeal that I filed, because to just generally say that, I participated in this deflating without any type of specific evidence, it's unwarranted. And the second issue that he raises is that I want an injunction on this suspension until my appeal is finally ruled on, at this stage and by the district court. And so what do you think about sort of the strength of his claims, both of those?
Not good. In short, just not good. You know,
Right.
about the injunction, he would have to prove that there will be irreparable damage or harm if he were not allowed to play.
Right.
And you know, it could be argued, 4 games, they could lose the whole season, and
Right.
you could be dramatic like that and argue
Absolutely.
that, or they can, on the other side, you're like, no, it's not irreparable. If we owe you the money for those
We'll
games,
pay for
we'll
those
pay
games,
you.
yeah.
So that one could go either way.
Mm-hmm.
That's not very strong. And then the whole.
But how can you repair? I'm playing devil's advocate. How can you repair the damage to the Patriots' winning streak when their quarterback, their star, is off for 4 games? I mean, I guess it comes down to, is 4 games material enough to change the season for the Patriots and for Brady?
Yeah, I guess this would require more sports knowledge than I have.
Not me.
I can't speak to that too well, but it just goes to show that these agreements that these players get into with the, I'm sure it's similar in the NBA, NHL, that they're not the same as in the ordinary court of law. These agreements where, the commissioner will weigh evidence and that you don't need the same burden of proof. It's
Right.
just more likely than not, which is
yeah.
a very different standard, and that the commissioner then hears the appeal and has to determine whether he or she himself, has it ever been a she? Not really. So I'll just say he himself has to determine whether there was any bias, no. And then, this is just how it goes. Now, the only glimmer of hope is, as you alluded to, that there have been some recent decisions that have been overturned. But all of those have been in reference to the players' conduct.
The personal conduct.
Right.
Not game conduct.
Correct.
Right.
Specifically domestic violence.
Right.
So like Ray Rice and Adrian Peterson, those kinds of decisions have been overturned because
This has to do directly with the integrity of the game, and that brings me to the point where his lawyer makes an interesting point. His lawyer says this whole violation that the NFL is alleging, the integrity of the game because of the cheating has been affected, etc., or deteriorates as a result of this type of conduct. He says that's against the team, not against an individual player. So you've got the wrong guy. You've got the individual.
Well, they
and he
did
says,
punish the team
but-
also.
Yeah, but he says you can't punish the individual. You have to punish the team only. And I think he has a valid point. He says no player in NFL history has served a suspension for non-cooperation or obstruction, which is the other issue. I think Goodell was pissed off that Brady didn't cooperate in the investigation,
Well, that
didn't
was-
turn over things.
that was very weird. We had talked before about how
Yeah.
he didn't turn over the
Right.
phone and how that's
Right.
fine unless it's subpoenaed
Right.
and he should.
Right.
But now
I
we
think
found
that
out.
upset, and I think could have very well influenced Goodell in his decision, who, of course, he's not going to say that's why I
But
ruled
it
this way.
does look a little fishy that it's not that Tom Brady didn't turn over the phone, it's that he had it destroyed. That's weird to me.
Right.
And this is not a court of law. They're allowed to draw inference from that.
Right.
And then the inference is obviously that the phone contains some information that would be harmful to Brady's position. So, it probably pissed him off, but they're also allowed to draw from that some conclusion that there was some wrongdoing that would have been evidenced by the contents of that phone. And even had there been a subpoena and they had done it through the legal system, there would have been no phone to discover because he had it destroyed. I mean,
Right.
what? Just and I know he said he destroys phones all the time. I don't know. Do you know any good reason for phones to be destroyed?
What if he's I don't know. I'm completely speculating. Don't quote me this, but what if he's like got a little girlfriend on the side and doesn't want Giselle to find out? Maybe that's why he's destroying his phone. I mean, as if I was defending him, I would come up with a whole slew of reasons not related to his conduct in the game and in this scenario as reasons why he has private things in that phone. Not every private thing in that phone has to do with deflating balls. It might have to do with some other private parts of his life. And as unusual as it sounds to you and I, from a legal perspective, he's free to destroy phones. I mean, yes, it looks kind of odd, but he can describe that, or he can find a million different reasons why. You know what I mean? His lawyer could.
Then he
could
can't
bring
be
up.
that mad when that evidence is used to against him
Right.
in the
Well, I think he does. I think
NFL's
he really
rules.
does have a good argument that there's inherent bias, that an arbiter needs to be impartial.
But he needs to go to like the Supreme Court of the NFL.
And but he's in district court now. He's in federal district court, and I don't think he's going to stop. I think he's going to keep going. That's why he wants the injunction.
Because that's an issue not just of his case, but of how the NFL hears all cases.
Right.
So I'm not sure.
But I also have to think. I also have to say that when you're dealing with someone like Brady of his stature, and from that team that just won this big victory, his reputation, I think a lot of this also has to do with the principle of all of this. Somebody needs to stand up to Goodell. Goodell has just been just out of control with a lot of his decisions.
But what do you mean out of control? That's what the role gives him the power to do. And for us, it's kind of weird because there's no person out in our legal system that has that kind of power.
Right.
But essentially, isn't that what everyone signed up for?
No, I know, but I'm not questioning his power. I'm questioning the fact that, and I don't want to get into a whole thing, but we had other shows where we had discussed some of his decisions and compared to other decisions, and it just wasn't correlating. It wasn't adding up, where he would give a really light suspension to someone and a really heavy suspension to someone else, with a much more egregious one on the guy that he lightly slapped on the hand. So it just doesn't, he's not been consistent. And I think Brady is like, you know what? I got the time, I got the money, that's why I want the injunction so I can continue playing, because by the time I get up to the U.S. Supreme Court on this issue, or wherever I need to go, my 4 games are over already. So he wants to continue playing so that, and I think that shows that he has an intention of not letting this go and continuing up the ladder to wherever he needs to go.
Well, the games are coming up relatively soon, are they
in
not?
September,
Again,
yeah.
I don't even have
End
enough.
of August, early September,
Okay.
I believe, is when the season starts. All right, so, we want to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think that this was a fair decision? Do you think that Goodell should not have been the one hearing the case on appeal? And what do you think about the fact that somebody gets to choose what state they bring their case in? What's wrong with that? Why did this have to get moved to New York? Let us know at Azari Law, at Chelsea Galicia. And I think, Chelsea, that brings us to the close of today's edition of Justice is Served. We thank you so much for staying in tune with us. Please view us on iTunes and YouTube, and like us and post your comments, and we will reply. And we will see you next week right here on Justice is Served. Bye-bye, everyone.
From executives Kevin Undergaro, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, and the entire BHL staff, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us. info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I am the official voice of Black Hollywood Live, Scipio, Instagram me at KingXOBay. Thanks for tuning in. The views expressed here are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.